Well, now let's turn to a development in one of President-elect Trump's campaign promises, mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. This promise is already taking shape as NBC News is reporting the incoming Trump administration is in talks with private prison companies about expanding immigrant detention centers across the nation. Mr. Trump further outlined his deportation plan yesterday by responding true to a Truth Social post, that's his social media platform, saying he will declare a national emergency and use military assets to deport undocumented immigrants. NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us with more on this. Julia, good morning. So what do we know at this point about the planning underway for these deportations, and do we know which groups would be targeted first?
Well, Savannah, that was one word to say a lot. And the way that tweet from that person from Judicial Watch read just said military assets. So there's still a lot we don't know. In the past, Trump, as well as other administrations, have used some military assets, like the National Guard. Under the first Trump administration, active duty troops were sent to the border to build barriers. The line is drawn, however, and it's drawn pretty clearly by the Constitution, that the U.S. military is not allowed to enforce domestic law. That means they can't put handcuffs on migrants. They can't actually detain them, arrest them, and take them into custody. That is always left to Customs and Border Protection and to the Border Patrol. So in this case, it's unclear what he means by military assets. But if he's talking about invoking a law that he's talked about before, the Stafford Act, it would make him basically say, we are under an alien invasion from a foreign government. That would be hard to argue in court because, of course, most of these migrants are leaving countries that they're trying to flee the government, not representing a government themselves that's invading the United States. So that has been an idea floated in the past. Whether or not he goes that far still remains to be seen.
And Julia, as you point out, we don't have exact details in terms of the military assets that would be involved, what that looks like. But what impact will deploying the military, just generally with what we know, have on the situation?
Well, certainly it will be something that will cause attention. Whether or not it will actually end up arresting more migrants remains to be seen. It's something that is a bit of a muscle flex for the president. It's something he did in the previous administration to show he was serious. It's something other states have done. A lot of Republican governors will send their National Guards from their states, even not border states like South Dakota, what we're seeing from the incoming DHS secretary, something that she offered to Texas to send her National Guard. Something governors have done in the past to show they mean business. Whether or not it actually increases the number of arrests remains to be seen because, of course, if he doesn't cross that line of actually arresting more migrants, that wouldn't increase it. What would is if he taps local law enforcement, something he said he's done, something we've heard from some local sheriffs they're willing to do. If they start arresting migrants, that would increase the manpower of ICE to go out and do more arrests. That would actually have a very large impact on deportation. Savannah.
And Julia, Trump's newly appointed border czar, his name is Tom Homan. He said he will be traveling to Mar-a-Lago this week to work on finalizing this plan. Tell us more about Homan and what we know about plans that we've heard from him.
Well, the border czar is a relatively new position. It's one that was created at the end of the first Trump term. It was held by Ken Cuccinelli. He didn't really stay in that position long enough for us to see what he could do. What we understand about Homan is that while he'll be at the White House, he can tap the Justice Department, Health and Human Services, which oversees unaccompanied children who arrive at the border, the State Department to work with countries who are reluctant to take back migrants, as well as DHS. He'll be in a very powerful position, reporting directly to the president. And so while he's at Mar-a-Lago, he can start to work out some of these details about how they're going to pressure more countries, how much money they're going to ask for from Congress in order to carry out these plans. And yes, whether or not they're going to try to invoke those powers to be able to use the U.S. military to help in this effort. So a lot of these plans are already being ironed out way before they come into office. This is a difference than we've seen in the first term. Remember, one of the first things President Trump did when he took office in 2017 was the transit ban, what a lot of people called the Muslim transit ban because it targeted those countries. That was something that kind of built while they were flying the plane. In this case, the election didn't come as much of a surprise, so a lot of these details are being ironed out way in advance so that they can try to do something very visual, something that could shock a lot of people when they first take office.
All right, Julia, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.